Now for introductions, most people call me Tandem, or Tavish, or Particle Wave, many of my gaming names, but my name's Dawn. And from here I'm just going to go through some things and look at the documentation as we know it. So with Ascension UnChained, that's my scenario. What I want to make everyone aware of is really the folder structure and why it's important. Within the game directory itself, you'll have a content and configuration folder. Inside the configuration folder is all the basic vanilla configs for the game. And that's not what you want to be editing. In fact, what you want to edit is under the folder that says scenarios. Once you open up the folder in scenarios, you can edit an existing scenario, you can create your own scenario by copying and pasting their folder structure and then editing it to your liking. It's up to you, really. But what I recommend is eventually you'll come up with your own folder name for your scenario so that others can download it from the workshop. So with that in mind, my folder within the scenario folder is called Ascension UnChained, and here's the ID. Within that folder we have the same structure as the game almost. We have a content folder that looks very similar to theirs. It has a configuration folder and within it the same list of files. If you don't have them, copy and paste them over. But you really only need this list of files that you see in order to accomplish gameplay. So you've got an animations file, you have a BAI config file, this is about the AI, the blocks config, block shapes window, we just add that in there so folks can copy it to their vanilla directory so they're able to right click certain blocks and see all the various shapes. If you don't have this file, then you'll be missing some of the shapes for blocks. Config file, this is where many people add things that are in the base game, but they want to edit the attributes of those items or devices so that they're not editing the actual original devices from blocks or items. Blocks is really used for all the items that you can attach to a base or a capital vessel or a standard vessel or whatever it is that you're building. Blocks are devices. Items, on the other hand, are things that the player interacts with or uses, like guns, multi-tools, different weapons, different consumables. Items can also be the weapon that a turret holds. The turret itself, you'll find out in later videos, is actually held on a block because it has to attach to a device. But within that block, you'll see that it has information, and I'll cover that in more videos to come. But it has information relating to what weapon is it holding. And then of course that weapon would be in the items config. So we also have containers, and this defines your loot containers. Oftentimes if you see an NPC that has a loot config, the number that he has goes to these containers. And I'll explain each one of these files in depth throughout different videos. For now I'm just explaining what the file itself is for. Damage multiplier config is a new file that we got just with 1.8, and it allows us to affect multipliers that your class or other skills might enhance on your damages or on your research. Definitions of reputation, it basically depicts the reputation for each of the factions and how they react to others around them. Dialogues, config, and examples, it's really just that. Just an example of the config and other dialogues that you could use. So feel free to open it up and read it and learn from it. Dialogues itself. Now these two files, these are very interesting files because dialogues has the ability to calculate math and record history of events over time in the background without anybody ever being subjectly aware of it. It's actually doing math and calculating how many times you did certain things. It's also your interaction when you speak to vendors. Dialogues will pop up and they'll interact and talk to you. But a well-kept secret about dialogues is the fact that it does math. It holds global variables within it that depicts what the variable stands for and what it does. And with those variables, we can make them do almost anything, even execute commands based on events that people perform. E-class config, this is all about the classes. E-groups config, again this is about the groups pertaining to the classes of creatures and NPCs that you interact with. Factions, it is what it says. It will depict what factions are within it. And we'll go over each of these files, like I say, in more in depth as I crack them open. But for now, this video is just about introducing the file structure itself. Faction warfare, it'll get a little bit more intricate on how they act and react with each other, whether or not you'll get reputation for certain actions, whether or not they'll go hostile for other actions against them, things like that. Galaxy config is extremely important. The galaxy config is going to determine the number of stars randomly generated in your solar system. It's going to depict what type of stars, what type of planets fall under those stars, what type of asteroid fields, ice fields, whatever it is that you create. You can then list them within galaxy config to be populated throughout the system. Don't get it confused with sectors. Sectors is another animal altogether. Sectors is your static galaxy. The galaxy that you decide, I want this to definitely be in this location, this star, this moon, this planet, in this order. And it'll position them accordingly. Whereas galaxy config is going to randomly generate things around the sectors. Everything beyond the sectors file. Items config is pretty simple. It's just all your items within the game. You can mark whether they're viewable or not viewable, but all of them should be viewable within the H menu that you want admins or GMs or solo players to have access to. Loot groups. Loot groups works a lot with containers. This is where you define for a particular loot group ID, this is what it's going to give you. If I want to give you meds, what kind of meds? Pick from these 5. And each one's like a random percent chance. Material config. Material config affects your blocks and your terrains that people interact with. In the material config, you can actually decide how hard something's going to be to mine or tear apart, how many hit points it has, how resistant it is to different damages. SQL queries, I'm not too keen on, but I believe it's part of the database that you can add that will allow your web page to interact with your scenario in order to query items and other things. But I haven't personally used it, so I won't get into that at all. I welcome anybody else to do a video on it. It would be helpful. Now on status effects, this is how we get affected by poison and broken leg and all the different things that affect us. Even good status effects, whether how we heal and how much we heal. So you'll find a lot of information in status effects that pertain to that. Templates. Templates is vital. Anytime you make an item or a block, you usually have to make a template in order for it to be crafted. Your crafting machines, such as your deconstructor, your constructor, your furnace, it decides how it interacts with items based on what's in this folder, templates. And then we have token config. Many of your missions might require tokens. Instead of creating an item for the token, an item ID, a block ID, which everybody knows we're limited to. We only have 4,096 block IDs to use, half of them of which are already used by the vanilla game. And then there's item IDs. So both of them only have 4,096 possible uses. So with the token config, you can actually add a couple hundred more tokens that don't require item or block IDs, and yet they can be existent in the world simply by adding them to your dialogues or your PDA events that detect for them and request them to be in a person's backpack in order to move further or to open a door, things like that. A token is like a key. Trader NPC config. This will affect your traders within the game, what their name is, what they sell, how much they sell it for, and whether or not they have a decent percentage of a chance for a deal or not. Things like that. All those statistics are within the NPC config. Now in the extras folder, which is the next one down from content, you'll notice it's PDA. Within PDA, you have the ability to affect all the stories within the game. Now personally, I like Rexus's PDA editor. It's a web GUI online, and I'll show you all how I use it. But you can edit these files manually with Note++ or TextPad, whatever your favorite editor is, as long as it's not using WordWrap. You can use that editor to edit these files. But personally, I like the EPD editor, and I use it often. It allows me to visualize what I'm writing while I'm writing it. Localizations file is extremely important. In fact, you could create an entirely new scenario simply by going into localizations and editing the things within it. At the top of localizations, it has a language key, of course, so that you have different words for different languages so that many people around the globe can understand what's going on in the game. The nut and gritty of it all is that you need a name for an item, written similar to this within the blocks or items, but then you end up having a real viewable name of that item that we see as players. So it connects what we see to that name. Oftentimes, if you're editing a block or an item, you'll want to find that block or item by its name here so that you know you're grabbing the right short name to use when you're editing the files. So I'll search for this name in blocks or items, whereas this one here is what I see in the game. So I'll search this, then I'll copy this, search it in blocks or items, go to the cockpit SV short range, and then I'll edit whatever attributes I want to edit. The localizations file will help you find what you're looking for when all you have is a game name and not the actual official name of that block or item. That's how this comes in handy, because you could literally just change the words of how everything's read in the game from here over after this first comma, and it could be a whole new themed game just by changing the names of everything. Sky's the limit really on that. But personally, you might start there, but eventually you'll get deeper into things as far as editing blocks and items and adding dialogues for different interactions with NPCs and adding PDA events for the missions themselves. But localizations file is a really cheap way of taking somebody else's scenario and making it your own, simply by changing the words that it uses and displays to the players. Playfields. Playfields are all the planets that make up your galaxy, as well as your sectors. Your sectors file will refer to these words. Exactly. It'll give you the name of a planet, and then it'll give you these words after the comma, because it says, okay, the planet is Bespin. Okay, within Bespin, we're going to make it a Bespin lava gas. That's what's written after the comma, and I'll show you that here in sectors. So we'll just search. Let's go to Bespin. We'll do a little search here. So we have Bespin. It's got a star and what type of star it is, the location of the star. You go down, you need the random setup for the star itself, and then you need the locations that people space warp target to. Believe it or not, this word space warp target is over here. Same as we scroll down into the sectors section, we see this is the planet. And I'll be darned, it's Bespin lava gas. And the faction that starts on this starter planet would be Tesh. All of these things after the comma matter. But Bespin lava gas is telling us that is our playfield. So you go into playfields, you find Bespin lava gas, you go to its static. You always deal with a static on a planet and a dynamic for a space field. But on a planet, playfield static, we could then open it up and edit it, anything we want to edit about that planet. Its description, what type of planet it is, whether it's a space or planet playfield, all the different atmosphere effects, all the way down to the goodies, which is the POIs. The POIs are the different buildings and things you interact with on that playfield. And so my biggest recommendation for all of these files, no matter which one you dive into, is that you use the same spacing and syntax that was already there. Don't reinvent the wheel. Don't correct things because you think they need corrected. Use what they have, because believe it or not, it works. And so you have to repeat what works. If you go changing the syntax of this and go changing the spacing, trying to proofread it, then you're going to corrupt it. Every file has its own structure when it was created, and you have to follow that structure in order to get things right. If you deviate from that structure, you're asking for anomalies to occur, and it's going to happen. So my best and fullest recommendation is to use whatever structure they have, and that means the number of spaces between this dash, the number of spaces after that dash, because in different files they use different formats, and you're best to just adapt to the format being used. Don't copy and paste from one file to another. It's not going to work. You have to use this file structure. You'll want to copy the whole thing, copy it, paste it, and then add a different name for the building you want to use. This is your prefab name. It's that easy. In a planet, we go by group name. Up in space, we go by the file's name, which in space it'll just say name instead of group name. Things like that matter, and that's why I wanted to give everyone a rough intro so they would understand the basics of what to do and what not to do before they even edit any file at all. It's very important that you follow the file structure because each one was built in its own way. Prefabs, like I said, this is all your prefabs, your EPB files that you've saved over time, you've created over time, various buildings and different things like that. They're all here. Those are your blueprints, and that's where the workshop comes in handy and creative mode comes in handy, because you can edit all these different buildings, you can add different NPCs, different types of loot containers to them, and then when you add them to your playfield, those buildings will come in with those NPCs defending that faction type, whatever the case might be. But that's where all that magic happens. And then down here with prefab stock, this is where if you have some folks that are good builders, you can put their prefabs in here as stock, and all players that download your scenario will have access to that stock in their prefab selection menu. And so they can spawn in those different types of things just because they already have the prefabs for them. They didn't have to build anything. Random presets, this is a whole another animal, and this animal coincides with the galaxy config. So your galaxy config is going to define various different things about different star types, And then from the random presets, it'll go even further by explaining each of those star types and what type of stuff is in them. Now, in order to add stuff to any of these, you first must add it to system config defines. System config defines every star, every moon, gas giant, planet, space station, triangle, mission objective triangle, combat objective triangle, exploration whatever you create as objectives on the play fields in space that people can select to warp to, it's in here. And once you have them all listed in here, you can then go over here and reference to them at an O type star, N2 type star, M2 type star, K2V star, K2 star, K star, whatever you want. You just go into it and you start editing it. And again, we'll have classes on this later. Right now I'm just giving you an intro of it. Sectors, we already showed. The importance of sectors is right here. That's your main starting planets, where you start when you start the game. Whether you're on a particular planet or a moon, that's determined whether or not they put your faction origin name after the comma. If there's no name after the comma, then guess what? Nobody's going to be there. So like here, Aether, Homeworld, Tesh faction. These factions I created. They are what I called origin factions, but they are depicted in a whole nother file. Believe it or not. We'll go back here to the factions. And def factions, faction warfare, and other files, factions, let's see, which one was it? This one? Public, Zyrax, Predator, Prey, Admin, Talent, Polaris, Alien, Tesh, Legacy. You know, if you read the top of these files, they give you a great deal of information related to this file. And so you can create additional factions, it tells you, and it tells you how. And this is where I put them so that the system would recognize them. For the Sindarians, the Equations, whatever kind of arc or additional factions you want to add, you can add them in here. But they are all based on the Zyrax faction and then expanded upon from there. And you'll learn that later, but it is important. Now under faction warfare, you can decide how they interact with each other. But def reputation, this is where I put in my names. Colonist faction, Polaris faction. Notice each one has a number after it. These are humans. This is their reputation with the other factions. Epsilon, Gist, Surdu, Abyssal, Talon, Polaris. They have a starting reputation with each faction, and you have to define what that starting reputation is. Now, after they've started their reputation, where do they go from there? Well, if you read down through a little bit further, you'll notice that they have this matrix, which determines what kind of actions cause what kind of negative rep. And then they also have factions that are related to each other and what kind of stuff you can do to a Zyrax and how their friends react to it. So if you were to attack a member of Zyrax, Zyrax of course is going to get mad, but will Talon, will Polaris, will Pirates get mad? This determines it. Whether it's a positive integer, they get happy about it. If it's a negative integer, then they get mad. No, naturally, Zyrax, Xenu, Rados, Epsilon, they're all related to each other, so they're going to get upset when you attack one of their friends. So this is where you determine who's allies and who's not. But all of it's subject to change by you. So let's see here. I think we're about finished for today's broadcast, but afterwards we're going to show a little insert of gameplay from our famous GRG, our natural born killer. And basically this has been a tester that went through daily wipes almost every day, and he played through every mission and every encounter from the beginning without any help and tested vigorously everything that we ever threw at him. That's GRG. So he's going to be publishing our videos soon on gameplay, and we're going to link to it so that you can enjoy his content. The only other thing I can think about today is in the main folder of the game, you'll see a description text, which, believe it or not, is the description of your scenario. A game options YAML, which is what is uploaded to a remote host or kept locally for you to host. And then a preview picture, which is usually a picture of your scenario. And you've seen Ascension UnChained picture before. But every scenario has their own little picture trying to give a depiction of what their scenario is about, kind of. But it's up to you and your marketing team and what you decide. But you have options to insert pictures. You have options in shared data to actually add item icons of your own, which we did. We have an artist that created new item icons for us so that we could overwrite the old vanilla or reforged Eden or whatever icons we had. We would remake them with new icons so the guns look different, the bitmaps look different in your skill tree menu or your H menu, things like that. So there's a lot of possibilities for editing both the pictorial interaction of the game as well as the context of the game's physical capabilities. It's all here, and we love it, and it's like a never-ending journey for us. Loading screenshots, self-explanatory. You go in there and read about it. It allows you to load different screenshots as a screen show while people are logging in. So that's a good way to make a scenario yours, is by editing the screenshots that they see while they're logging in. You could have tooltips that pop up and things like that. It's all good stuff. And that's about it for my video today and what I wanted to introduce you to, and we'll go from there. And you know, as questions prevail, we'll add more content related to your questions in the comment section, and I'll try to stay focused in a more organized manner on each of the categories that we decide to teach you. But this is just the opener to give you a basic run through of what we intend to do every Friday, and then from here on out you'll actually be able to take part in our teaching and learning process of doing that. Alright, well, if anybody has any questions or comments, feel free to add them in the section below, and we'll react as soon as we can, and try to have a great day.